All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to support and inspire new trauma therapists just starting out on the trauma-informed journey. I do that with my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0, my online courses and workshops, and the Trauma Therapist newsletter. If you're a therapist of any kind and you work with individuals who've been impacted by trauma, I invite you to head on over to my website at thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. All right, let's get started. Andy, are you ready?
I'm all set. Thanks.
All right, here we go. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. I am very excited and honored to have back, it's been a long time, Dr. Andrew Hahn. Andy, welcome.
Thank you so much, Guy. I feel so honored to be here, so thank you.
I appreciate it. So Dr. Hahn is a licensed clinical psychologist and the developer of the Life-Centered Therapy Training Program, and co-author, along with Joan Beckett, of the book, The 1 Hour Miracle, which we're going to be talking about today. Well, Dr. Hahn's strong foundation and significant experience in traditional psychology has served his clients well. He's been untiring in his effort to better understand what is going on for people so that he could better help them live more contented and healthier lives. This calling for greater understanding, as well as certain experiences which he couldn't fully comprehend within the confines of traditional Western paradigms, led him on a search for answers that opened him up to the worlds of Buddhist and Eastern psychology, as well as mystery trainings and depth, archetypal and spiritual psychology. Andy, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Guy.
So, all right, before we get going here, we met early on, and I'll certainly link up that early podcast episode. But before we get going here, Andy, share with the listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
I'm from a place called Belmont, Massachusetts, which was directly west of Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is directly west of Boston. And now I live in Waltham, which is one town south of where I grew up.
Okay.
So I'm about 10 miles from Boston west.
All right. Awesome. So you have a very interesting background, and I want to, well, when people ask you, what do you do? What do you say?
I say, what I do is this, if I'm talking simply. I say what I do is I try to help people. My job is to be of service so that I can work with a person or a couple or a group or a family or anything, heal suffering, which is healing trauma, and this, because I think suffering and trauma are exactly the same thing, and master whatever it is that I think, because I think trauma is simply what can't be handled, master it so that they can live a life that's really in alignment with life and in alignment with their soul. So I'd say what I do is I help people remember who they are, which is to be able to say who I am is everything, and then to find my particular, differentiated, unique place in all of that so I can live with aliveness and engagement and love and understanding and grace and make a contribution and be of service. Mm-hmm. That's what I say I do.
So the book, the new book, the 1 Hour Miracle, a 5-step process to guide your healing, to guide your self-healing, change the story, re-author your life. I want to ask you how this came about, but first I want to ask you about how this new paradigm came about, life-centered therapy. How did this come about?
My training, I have a PsyD. I got it in 1985, so I had a tremendous amount of clinical training. That's the beauty of a PsyD. And I was in Philadelphia, which was a hotbed of like everything. I mean, psychoanalysis and, really sort of cutting edge family therapy and CBT, and Minuchin was there. And, there was an incredible hypnosis community there. So it was remarkable. And I had a diverse training. And then what happened is I had some experiences that ended with an experience where a friend of mine had fallen down and had hurt herself very badly. And we had gone to a wonderful heart-opening chanting service at the holy grounds of a place called the Self-Realization Fellowship. And she had hurt her ankle. It was very swollen and discolored, and she was in a lot of pain. And I was sort of holding her up because she wanted to walk us around. And we got to these two benches, and she said, "We have to stop because you're going to have to carry me out of here." So she sat down on one bench, and I wanted her to be able to put her leg up. So I actually went to a very funny place because I had to circumambulate the whole thing and walk through some bushes to get so that I could get her leg to put on my elevated. And the second I sat down, the best way I could describe what happened is I was flooded with something that looked like a multiplicity of suns. And I knew it wasn't the sun because I could actually know where the sun was. And I knew that light wasn't coming from there. And it just came down like through the crown of my head. And I said to her, "Roshan, I'm not even going to touch you. I'm just going to experience some energy flowing through my hands to your ankle." And I did that for about 5 seconds, maybe a little longer. And she said, "You know, I can read auras, don't you?" And this was 1991, I don't know, 1991. And so I said, "Roshan, I'm a nice Jewish boy from Boston. What do I know from auras?" And she said, are you aware that there's light coming down through the crown of your head into the center of your chest and out your hands to my ankle? And are you also aware that you sat in this really strange place? And I said, "Well, yeah, because I wanted you to be able to elevate." And she said, "That's called the seat of the healer. People don't sit there typically. It's a rare thing that anyone would sit where you sat." And then we looked down, and there's no swelling, there's no discoloration, she gets up and she walks out and there's no pain. And I said, sort of like to myself, "We're not in Kansas anymore." And I then spent 2 years like just going wherever I was led to try to understand that and a lot of other experiences I had had. And in the midst of that, I did what are called past life regression trainings, although I don't think anyone regresses.
Hang on, let me interrupt you. So okay, so wild. I mean, this is crazy. Like this, you experience this light, this energy. What did you make of this? Like after that happened, what did you guys talk about this? Did you?
We talked about it some, and she said, like, it's the vibration of the divine.
And was this the first time you experienced something like this?
Like that, yes, but I had a lot of other unusual experiences before then, but that was the first time I had an experience like that.
Okay.
I had some very strange experiences from the time I was young, but nothing like that. So that was the first, and it was a real change point.
Okay. So continue. So you went on to, you said the next 2 years.
I studied everything you can imagine. I studied Eastern mysteries. I studied Buddhism deeply. I studied the Enneagram. I studied psychosynthesis. I studied healing through touch. I studied, you name it. And then 2 years after that, I had an acquaintance. She said, "You have to go see this woman. She's doing miracles in New Jersey." Well, she wasn't in New Jersey. She was 10 miles from me. But my acquaintance told me a story, which was that a woman was at this workshop with a woman named Judith. Judith ran the workshop, and she had such a bad case of asthma, she could barely walk up the stairs. I'll tell you fast. And so this woman said that Judith did this thing called muscle testing, which I'd never heard of, and had her tap all over her body while she told the story. And then the muscle testing said that the asthma was balanced. So Judith, who has a strong personality, said to the woman, "Why don't you go outside and see if you feel different?" The woman starts to walk, then she starts to run. She runs up and down the street. She comes back, I'm told. She's like totally winded and exhilarated. And she said, "I haven't been able to run a step in 7 years." And I thought, that's a pretty wild story. So I found out where Judith was, and I found out what Judith was doing. And Judith and I became collaborators, and we took all the stuff that she knew about muscle testing and kinesiology. And she was one of Roger Callahan's first students. So she knew about what is now called emotional freedom technique, but back then was called Callahan tapping. And she had found this amazing teacher in California who's an angel, who was a craniosacral therapist, and she had done her own research, even though Judith knew nothing about psychology. She had done her own original research on loss and violence traumas, and it said they both, any violence or loss trauma has exactly the same structure. The surface content doesn't matter. And if you know what that structure is, you can heal any kind of trauma around loss or violence. And she wrote these 2 papers about it that are extraordinary that nobody knows about. And we took that and everything I had ever studied, because I was a soul psychologist and she was basically a person who was a neurobiologist who had studied NLP, and we became collaborators for a couple of years. And out of that came what she calls healing from the body level up, and what I call now life-centered therapy. And our ways of understanding things are very different, but the work has a common root that we collaborated on. And that's how in 1993, this work started. So it's now 30 years that I've been doing a variation of it. And it looks somewhat different than back then, but it's still very simple to describe. And, so that's how it came about. And I've been doing it for 30 years.
Your pursuit and your research and your wide study of different areas was what, an attempt to understand what that experience was, that energy going through you?
I think it was far more than that. I think from the very earliest times, I cared about a couple of things. I wanted to understand all of the answers to all the questions in the universe. I went to a planetarium show when I was 6 years old, and it was a show about going to the moon. And I walk out of there, and my brother, who's 3, I walk out and I say, I want to understand everything in the universe. And my brother says, I want to know how to get to the moon. And that tells you everything you need to know about us. And then when I was, some things happened. When I was 11, I'll tell you quickly, my parents were at a dinner party for this man who turned out to be a radio talk show host in Boston. He was the biggest one in overnight radio talk show, and they were all laughing. And I'm standing outside, and I'm in like 5th grade, and I walk in, and I understand why they're all laughing, which is that he had a guy on who believed in ESP, and they were all like making fun of him. And I said to them, well, if you could see and everybody else was blind, how would you prove to them that you could see? And they did exactly what you're doing. They just sat there and said nothing. So I figured they didn't know the answer, so I walked out of the room. So it's like I've always been wanting to understand what's going on, and I've always loved people, and I've always wanted to understand people and love them. And that led me to, among other things, to psychology. And then I said, there's got to be something better than what I learned in graduate school.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was at that point, I was a training director in a clinic, and I was a professor, and I was getting good results. I said, there has to be something better. And that's when all this started to happen. And if you told me, I'll just finish, if you told me that I would see the things that I've seen since then, I would have said, yeah, and pigs can fly to the moon, except now I believe pigs can fly to the moon, because I've seen things that make that story about asthma kind of pale in comparison. But it's really about freedom from suffering, and the miraculous quote unquote results we get in content, which we do sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you're interested in psychosis, so I could tell you a very interesting story about that, because I have my ideas about what I think psychosis is in terms of trauma.
Well, let me ask you before you do that. What is life-centered therapy? This is a new paradigm, a different paradigm in contrast to traditional?
It's a new paradigm. Basically, the idea is, why we call it life-centered therapy is we think that we have to do 2 things in life. One is we have to be life. And the best way I can explain that is the ideas of sort of the biological holographic idea of cells and bodies. So each of our cells, we have 3 trillion cells. Each of them is different on the surface, but underneath them, they all have to be the same, because you could take one of them and create Dolly the sheep. So the whole universe is in the grain of sand, so to speak. We know that. So what is our spiritual role in life is to say, I'm not what I identify with, which is the surface. Really, I am the evolving everything. I am the template. And if you know that, that means that I'm in relationship with life. Everyone is in relationship with life, and all of us are life. And so I think our work on a soul level is to become the template and to say, who I am is everything.
Mhm.
And then there'd be no judgmentalism. There'd be no trauma, because if you're everything, anything could happen to you, and you could say, it's just part of life. I wouldn't be traumatized. And so, what is the work? The work then is to say, once I do that, then what is my particularity, my differentiated soul work? So I get up in the morning and I say, I'm of service to life, and I feel so alive when I get up, because I know I'm in alignment with life and doing my part to be a vessel for whatever that is. And it's really simple to say how you do it, which is,
Mhm.
why do people suffer? What is trauma? It's simply something that can't be handled, can't be taken in stride and integrated. If you could say, and so what is therapy? It's simply mastering what couldn't be taken in stride. And it's very simple. You could tell a 10-year-old how to do it, which is that whenever there's something that can't be handled, in that moment, a sensation is born. So, and that sensation is not a part of you, it's its own living being. It was born in a moment, and it has its whole life, and it's a living being just like Guy is. So if I say to Guy, let's say Guy comes in, right? And Guy has motorcycle backfires. I'll try to be fast with this. And Guy has a panic attack. And I say, Guy, when you're having this panic attack, right? What's happening in your body? And you say, heart's pounding fast. And I say, Guy, I'm going to say something strange to you. You're not having a panic attack. Your little toe is fine. Someone whose name is heart pounding fast is having the panic attack. But you've forgotten that. And so you've unconsciously identified with heart pounding fast. And the second you become aware of heart pounding fast, if you could choose to become heart pounding fast from the inside out, you would consciously, in the same way that an actor would choose to become enrolled in something fully, but would know they weren't that it was an experience they were having, but it wasn't who they was. The second you choose to become heart pounding fast, you're no longer traumatized anymore, because you are the self that is choosing and then bearing witness and holding who that ever that is. And then if you tell me, oh my God, bombs are going off, and right, which is what's going on, but you wouldn't be saying that. Heart pounding fast would be, and then you'd say, oh, I'm now remembering that which has been dismembered, so that I believe that I was this part, but I no longer identify with it. I identify with the self who says, I'm here with you. And then something miraculous happens, which is heart pounding fast goes away. And theoretically, if that was the only reason you were having panic attacks, the next time a motorcycle backfired, you'd say, this is reminding me of being a soldier in Afghanistan when those bombs were going off. But it's not who I am.
Mhm.
Who I am is the one who remembers it. And that, I think, is all, in a simple way, you have to do in order to heal trauma. That's it.
So contrast this with quote unquote traditional Western psychology's approach.
Which, well, there's a lot of traditional Western psychology, but let's say you're doing talk therapy. Well, right away, you've got a problem, because it's like trickle down therapy, right? You're going to try to talk about something, whereas I'm going to say, what you want to have is the immediate experience of it, because it's here right now. So it'd be like I was talking about Guy, and Guy's sitting here. I'd say, why not just choose to bring all your attention to Guy and let Guy be the expert? And Guy is here, and his name is heart pounding fast, except his name now is Guy from 20 years ago. Or let's say the next time it happens, and the motorcycle backfires and Guy's throat closes up and he begins to have a pain in his foot. Then I'd say, someone's here and their name is throat closing up and pain in foot. So Guy, you're going to become throat closing up and pain in foot. And suddenly you say, wait a second, this time I'm like the leader of those soldiers. And like, I'm not paying enough attention, and I've walked them into an ambush and bombs are going off, and maybe it's in World War I. I don't care. Maybe you're not even Guy anymore. You're some soldier, with a uniform. What kind of uniform is this? And you walk them into that ambush, and like you say, oh my God, like the bombs are going off. I'm watching them all die. I should have paid more attention. Bombs are coming out of the sky, and like I can't stop it, and I should have paid more attention, and I never want to be a leader again. And then you take out your pistol, you shoot yourself in the foot, right? Because you don't want to be like, you want them to think that you don't want to be the leader anymore, and they grab you out of there and you lie about it and you say shrapnel hit me, and then you come to therapy and you think you're coming for panic attacks, right? But you also have OCD and you say it's like the sky is falling, but it's literally true. Or you have ADHD and you feel guilty about it. Or you say every time I want to be a leader I shoot myself in the foot. And you also have, like, you dropped something on your foot 7 years ago and no one knows why you have chronic pain because they said it should be better, but you're still limping. But if that was only that soldier in 1918, theoretically, and I've seen stuff like this, all those symptoms go away. This is why we call it, on that level, the 1 hour miracle, which was not our choice. But we've had stories where 6 or 7 symptoms that people have worked on forever go away in a half hour because they all got enfolded into one narrative that was about betrayal. So if I could find out the real problem wasn't the bombs going off, but betrayal, and I can do that, and I can find out where it crystallized, because everything after that is just an echo. And I say, I know this is going to sound funny, but you think you're coming in here because you're having panic attacks, but you're really coming in here because you betrayed a trust. And the person who betrayed the trust isn't even Guy. He's someone what we could call from another lifetime, however you want to understand that. And I don't care how you understand it. We know you're not going to be the main character in the story. But if you could find him and we could change his story and get him to get forgiveness and make amends, maybe you won't go around feeling like you can't be a leader anymore, or you have this sense of over responsibility that makes no sense to you. And maybe we could change all that.
So can you share with us a specific example of this? Obviously, we don't need names or anything, but let's kind of bring this down to someone you worked with.
Well, you want to hear a strange story? Because I know you're interested in psychosis and people who are psychotic.
Sure.
All right. I had a person, this was right after this all developed, and she was clearly DID, and she clearly was psychotic. She had all of the classic symptoms of DID, loss of time and all that stuff. Plus she had bugs crawling all over her. And she knew that that wasn't true, but she would and she'd been hospitalized a couple of times yearly until I saw her. And I do a kind of determination of what's going on. And I said, because she had a horrific history, and I will tell you, and she tells the story, and she had, there had been incest, there had been rape, there had been watching her mother shoot her and kill her sister. I mean, really horrendous violence, sexual and otherwise. So I do my diagnostic, and she's theoretically worked on all this stuff, and she's been hospitalized many times. And I said, what's coming up in my diagnostic is something called a superimposition, which means some kind of energy took you over. And it says your dissociative identity disorder, because she was a good reporter when she wasn't like feeling the bugs were there, and she'd come in and out like everybody else. And your psychosis is about this energy that took you over. Does that make any sense to you? And I was a little afraid to say that to her because, and she said, it makes total sense to me. I'm going to tell you what happened. She said, when I was 8 years old, I actually found out, I said, and this occurred between the time that you were 6 and 10. I could muscle test all that. And it says that that's your core problem, nothing else. And she said, I know exactly what it is. I was at my father's church, Southern Baptist. He was giving a fire and brimstone sermon. And while he was giving that sermon and people were having all of these experiences, this energy took me over. And it was like this dark cloud. And she said, I felt crazy. And she was already because of things that no one was talking about. She was seeing a psychiatrist, which is interesting given her history. And the psychiatrist said, you're crazy, and put her on Thorazine. And she vowed she would never tell anybody this again. And she hadn't until this time. And I said, this is now over 30 years later. I said, does that make sense? And she said, yes. And I said, well, maybe what we could do is take care of that dark energy and maybe you'll feel better. And she said, I'd love to. I have no idea how. All right. So we find out that it says she knows how to transform the dark energy. And she goes inside because we're going to take her back to age 8 when this happens, because the 8-year-old is here right now. She could feel it in her body, that 8-year-old who's being taken over. And she starts to experience what happens, but it says that she can tune in and find out how to transform it. And she says, this is very strange. I'm supposed to do a dance. Now, this woman was 1/16th Native American and was just getting interested in this stuff. And believe me, didn't know anything about dancing. And she starts to do this dance in my office that was so intricate. And she's dancing around like in this loop to a beat that's clearly going on in her head. And she does this for about a minute. I can still see this. It's the one case I wish I had had on videotape. One. And she's doing this dance. He looks at me like, what am I doing? And then she does it for another minute, and you can literally feel the room shake, and it gets lighter in the room, which I could sense. And she said, I'm done. And you want to know something? That woman never was hospitalized again. And I know that because 25 years later, I moved away and she moved away, and who knew what was going to happen? I knew she hadn't been hospitalized in the year after that I saw her, where we kept working on all this violence and all this stuff. We ended up in a doctor's office together, and she said, I asked her how she was, and she said, my life is way better. She said, I was never hospitalized again after that day. So there's a case.
Wow.
I still feel like,
So kind of just to reflect back here, there's this idea that you're presenting of kind of remembering, coming back to who we are at a very elemental level in relationship to everything.
Everything, yes.
Which is very different than, quote unquote, a lot of traditional Western psychology's approach.
I think it's different from everything because I don't know of any other psychology that starts there. People can start with mindfulness. They can start with polyvagal theory. They can start with all kinds of things. There are people who do somatic therapies, but usually they do the somatic therapy through mediating. Like, if your tears could say something, what would they say? I'd say, why would you talk to the person? Why don't you talk to tears? Right? It's different from parts work. I can do parts work if it says to, but parts work tends to be archetypal. Like there is a protector and a exile and a whatever, whereas I'm going to say, well, it may be archetypal. And if that's the case, we can work with that, but it's much more likely that it's a living being. And that living being could be a younger guy. It could be a guy 20 years from now. It could be somebody from guy's karmic past, however you want to understand that. And I don't care how you understand it. It's like, the imaginal. It could be one of guy's blood ancestors. It could be a little green woman from Alpha Centauri. It could be anything. That's what we call life-centered therapy, because if you open to every possibility of what the cause of the trauma is and every possible solution, you can't miss out. So I'd say, someone says, I want to do EMDR. I say, well, if EMDR is what's called for, I know how to do EMDR, but I can muscle test and say, if you need something like that, is emotional freedom technique a more elegant key for you than EMDR, because they do different things, because one does up, down, and one does left, right, or is frontal occipital holding, which we'll do back, front, but the most powerful practice, of course, is just awareness in a high vibrational field. When you identify with self, big S self, and hold and bear witness to the one who's traumatized, that's a body sensation. And that's the work, everything's a jazz.
The book's called The 1 Hour Miracle. You wrote this with
That was
Joan.
Not our title, by the way.
What was your title?
I will tell you what I wanted to call the book. We're going to write our next book, and we want to call it this. We wanted to call it The Body Holds the Key, because I think in both cases that's true. The body holds the key both to what the trauma is, and the body holds the key to opening to a deeper knowing. Source healing of trauma with life-centered therapy. Okay. Because we want to heal it, we open to source, and we want to heal it at the source, because everything else is echo.
Why did you write this book?
Because people are suffering. And I think we have this framework that opens to everything. And I've seen, I wrote the book because I want people to be able to heal, and you can literally tell a 10-year-old how to do this. And if they choose to bring their attention to the body sensation and let it share while they hold it, and they know that everything it says is literal, right? And they say it could be anybody. You can do your own healing work. So we originally wrote this as a popular book, but then they said, your book isn't long enough. You have to make it twice as long. So then we tried to tell therapists how they could do the work, but it's like, I wrote the book because I want every trauma therapist in the world to know that if you started with all of life and you started with the realization that people could do their own healing work, but that your guy is not the client. Guy is the expert on life as it comes through him, but the real client is discomfort in the body. And every time you drop into it and say, I will choose to be you and then I will hold you, you no longer are Guy. You are the self that's holding someone else that could be little Guy or anyone else. And you just say, you're the expert and you are dense life. What is a dense energy? It's matter. And what is it really? It's energy. And when you bring all your awareness to it and say, I will be with you, it goes back into its pure form, which is energy. And then suddenly the sensation goes away. And when we do that, and we are with everything we are afraid to experience, we become what is called realized beings. And then we as an identity go away. And you're no longer Guy, you're Guying. You're having the experience of being Guy, but it's not who we are. We're no identity at all. And the point here is when we get to a place of being no identity, we could say, anything I have judgmentalism of, I'm judging myself. Anything I compare myself to, I'm comparing myself to myself. Anything I'm anxious about is just something I can't say, I can be with that. I may not prefer it, but I can be with it. Mm-hmm. And that's why I say trauma, really, people say trauma is something too bad. No, trauma is simply anything that can't be taken in stride. If it's too good, that's a trauma. It just turns out to be craving as opposed to aversion. If it's too much, that's a trauma. So, I see we have something called a wonderful pattern, and wonderful patterns are things that were so good that they couldn't integrate them. People spend their whole lives reliving the original situation, like they had a boyfriend who moved away from them, and I'll never have a boyfriend like that again. And that's a trauma because they couldn't integrate it. They couldn't say, okay, that's an experience I'm having. It was so much better than everything else that they keep trying to relive it. Just like if it's so bad and they can't handle it, they keep trying to relive it. And trauma is subjective. Mm-hmm. If I'm a realized being, I can handle anything. I can handle being crucified. If I'm not, I'm going to scream at my father and say, why have you forsaken me? I was a good boy. But when I'm realized being, I say, I give my soul over to you. They can't do anything to me. They can kill my body. They can torture me, but it's not who I am. So they can't do anything to me. And that's what we all are striving towards, is to say, no one can do anything to us ultimately if we can say yes to everything. And then it's just like, then we say, okay, if we can say yes to everything now, how does life want to evolve when we don't get in the way because we're stuck someplace? And while we're stuck, all we can say yes to is, I'm going to become aware of my whatever's there when I'm feeling anxious or judgmental or depressed or whatever the hell it is, and I'm suffering about it. Our work with free will is to say, am I going to find that body sensation, which is, I think, the most elegant way to do it, right? And say, I will be with you, or am I just going to live it out? That's it. That's free will from my point of view.
So I will be with this body sensation I'm calling anxiousness or anxiety.
No, I call it like pain in stomach.
Pain in stomach.
Right? Until it tells us its name is Freddie or Sylvia, which some of my clients, when they do past life stuff, they say, I know who I was. It's 1872 and I was this train robber. And then they go back and they find there was a little article about a train robber who got shot in 1872 in the stomach and had an excruciating death, and then their IBS goes away. Right.
So in a sense, the work is allowing ourselves to be with this energy.
Yes. That's it.
And this is not just, this sounds more than just and I don't mean to diminish modalities, but this sounds more than just another trauma treatment modality. This truly does sound like a paradigm shift. You're inviting people to change their outlook in a sense.
Yeah. I wanted to say I want to invite our field into a whole different paradigm that starts with life. And if you start with life and say trauma is simply that which can't be handled in the context of life, and so energy becomes dense. And all we're to do, I agree with you, it's a whole paradigm shift, because it doesn't start with any part of life. It doesn't start with brain function. It doesn't start with cognition. It doesn't start with behavior. It doesn't start with mindfulness. It starts with everything. And it says our work in life is to become life as it's evolving, to do our part in the evolution of a living being whose name is life, that has a body, and we are mystical cells in that mystical body. And that's who we are. And trauma work, if you're a trauma therapist, from my point of view, you have one responsibility, which is to say, I will line up with the client that's lining up with that dense energy, and I will do nothing to lead the process, except that if they need a little nudge and say, the place you might want to look is, 5 generations ago on your mother's side, which may never have occurred to you. I can find that out for you. But then everything they say, you have to know 2 things. One is you can't comment on the process. The client, once they start the process, they are telling somebody else's story. There is no client sitting in front of you that you think is your client. It's only the dense energy. So if someone says, I can't do this, you just say, yes, that's right, you can't do this. Or people say, people can't find sensations in their body. What do you do? Well, I say, what do you mean? They say, well, they said they were feeling anxious. I said, when you're feeling anxious, what do you feel in the body? They say, I'm not feeling anything. So I don't know what to do. I said, they're answering your question. They're having a feeling called, I'm not feeling anything. Ask them where in the body they're feeling, I'm not feeling anything. I've never had someone who couldn't answer that question. People can't step outside of the process, and everything they say is literal. And all you have to do is say, yes, that's right. And if they say, I can't see anything, and they think they're commenting in 2022 that they can't see anything, meaning they can't do the process, all you say is, that's right, you can't see anything, which means they're at nighttime, or they're blind, or they're whatever, whoever this is. So all you ever do is say yes. And then if they need a practice, you ask life what the practice is. And if they need something more than just to choose to become the sensation and bear witness and hold it, if they need EMDR, then if you know EMDR, you can muscle test. And I said, I don't know what the best, if I only know EMDR, I'm going to do EMDR. If I don't know EFT, I'm going to do EFT. If I know both of them, I'll say, I don't know the answer, but maybe life does is it reveals itself through you. So put out your arm and we'll see which one is the best one. And I have no stake in the answer because I'm not proprietary. Right? Or it might say, do a spiritual practice and do a Buddhist practice. I say, fine. Or it might say, like, I'm supposed to do a sacred dance. Do the sacred dance. It's like, and it makes therapy, oh my God. And all we're required to, which you say all the time, is we're required to do our own work, which is the same work. So whenever it is that I get anxious about something, or I get judgmental, or I get craving, or I get averse, or whatever, I say, okay. Or if anything comes up with a client ever and I have any reactivity, I say, well, all right, as soon as I have a chance, what's going on in my body? I'll be with it. I'll choose to be with it. And I'll say, what have you come to share? I don't know, but you're the expert. And I'm in this place of understanding, right? Understanding, standing under. I'm in a one down place. I don't know. Therapists don't know anything. They think they know. They think people come to get fixed. No, people come to be told you're the expert, but you don't know the answer either. If you knew the answer consciously, you wouldn't be here. But there's an aspect of your being inside called the self that can know. And there's a being inside called sick to stomach that has a story to share. That's it. Everything else. If it never occurred to you that you had an extraterrestrial implant and that's why it is that your ears are buzzing, well, I can find that out for you because, you could spend a lot of time working on your tinnitus. But like, if it never occurred to you that you were in a story where you prayed to the universe that you don't want to hear bad news, and that's part of your issues, and you put out a prayer to the universe which you didn't remember, but you had this dense energy in your head that's part of your tinnitus, and then you see this strange creature that puts something in your head, and now you have static, and you say, could you please undo that? And it melts it and your tinnitus goes away. Believe me, you won't care if it's real or not because your tinnitus is gone.
Andy, as we wind down here, what's the best way for people to get in contact with you? Because I'm guaranteeing a lot of people are going to listen to this and they're going to want to wonder, do you do trainings and so forth?
Yeah.
And
We do trainings. We've got our trainings because of COVID. They're all online, and we spent a lot of time, and we have really lovely trainings, and we train people online, and we mentor them online, and yes. And
okay, is that life-centered therapy?
lifecenteredtherapy.com, and they can find it all. If they want to write me, I respond to my own stuff. All you do is put Hahn, Andy Hahn, Hahn at lifecenteredtherapy.com. I will get an email and I will respond to you.
Okay, awesome. Andy, you are intense, you're fascinating, you're inspiring, and this is a paradigm shift, and it's exciting.
Thank you, Guy.
I'd love to have you back. Love to continue this conversation. We can be in touch. This will go live. Well, I'll let you know when this goes live, but I want to thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
I want to thank you so much for inviting me back, because it gets better with age.
All right, sir. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for listening and supporting this podcast. And if you'd like to join the hundreds of other therapists who are each month keeping up to date and informed and inspired about what's going on in the world of trauma, I'd love to invite you to head on over to the Trauma Therapist newsletter. That's the traumatherapistnewsletter.com.